Hello and welcome back to the Kitabi Karwan podcast. Today we have with us for the first time a guest who's already appeared on our podcast before, Miss Aanchal Malhotra. You might remember her for her fantastic pieces of non-fiction, Remnants of a Separation and In the Language of Remembering. Two excellent books tracing, I wouldn't say the history, but the memories and the emotions associated with partition. Achal, as an oral historian, has come to become synonymous with the idea of partition and its stories in India. But today, we talk to her about her first piece of fiction, The Book of Everlasting Things, a beautiful novel set during the times of partition and pre partition India. And I must say, as a fan of well written fiction, I was bowled over. Archel's work as a non-fiction historian translates supremely well into her novel, tracing some interesting themes which you don't come across in regularly written fiction. Archel has created a world which drew me in and left me stunned. Without giving anything further away, let's jump right into the interview. Welcome back to the Kitabi Karwan podcast, Achal. I'm so glad to have you back, and this time as a weaver of the fabric of fiction. It's very interesting to talk to you about this. So, just off the bat, the first thing that I really wanted to ask you was, has this always been a goal or a dream, like to come up with a fiction book? Because the last time we spoke, we were writing your second non-fiction book, uh, and we couldn't do a conversation around that. But this time around, we're back to the fiction book. Was this always something on the horizon for you, or just something that happened?
No, as if you're asking whether I had always planned it from the very beginning of my writing career, the answer is no. But I think I couldn't have written this novel without doing the nonfiction work I did. So it grew out of that research, it grew out of the ideas that surrounded partition or any event of trauma where humans are caught in a web of politics and history. And I think there is a lot of anxiety switching over to a new genre, primarily because you don't know how that genre, the contours of that genre entirely work, and you're figuring it out as you're writing. But I think I did that with nonfiction as well because I came from a completely different background when I began writing nonfiction. So it was a similar kind of exploration for me. And I was actually writing this book alongside writing the second nonfiction book. So um, it was complicated, but it also provided respite from each other.
I get what you mean, though. Like, I mean, I think now it's over the past few years, I think it's synonymous to kind of associate your name with stories about partition. I mean, you've done a fantastic job documenting uh, such a monumental time in our history in a particularly different way. And I mean, it was kind of but natural to expect this to come from you. And I must say, it's a fabulously written novel. I mean, it's very engrossing. And actually, what I really wanted to talk to you about more than the partition was something that really has been the theme of the book is scents
Mm.
and the idea of knowing people through smells. Because I mean, I don't really find a lot of novels exploring it. And to be honest, it's not just novels. I don't think I, as a human being, or most people for that matter, have given it as much thought. But it's a very poignantly written book in that sense. I mean, it talks about a lot of ways in which human beings interact with the world around them, and particularly how the sense of smell is so vital and so, if for a lack of a better word, primal in the way we connect with it. What prompted this? Is this something that you particularly personally associate with as well, like smell as your preferred sense of interacting with the world, or is it just, and where did the inspiration come from?
Well, I think because I come from a world of art, I think all the senses play quite a large role in building the person I am. I remember being
Mhm.
in my first or second year of university and realizing that I experienced something called synesthesia, which a lot of artists and creative people experience. It's the overlapping of multiple senses.
Mhm.
So a lot of artists will for me, I can talk about myself. For me, it was when I see a color, I
Right.
feel like I can taste the color. And there are very, very specific tastes that are associated with specific colors. But it was because I was surrounded by this kind of artistic landscape that really fostered uh, the evocation via senses. So I don't think it was highly unusual for me to be attracted to the world of smell, or um, take smell and make it a primary character in the book. But I think obviously there are moments that pique your interest in it, because I don't think I have a great sense of smell. But I also know the more we smell, the
Mm-hmm.
better we smell. The more we smell with intention, the better we smell. So
Right.
when I began writing this book, it was only with a sense of curiosity about smell, and that was brought on by this tiny story that my mother had told me about my grandfather, who used to work as a chemist in Dabur, and he
Mm-hmm.
would make soaps and shampoos and lotions and stuff, and he was given these essences, these little vials of essences of papaya essence and rose and mogra and aloe vera, and he would use them to make his products. And then whatever he didn't use, he would bring home, and in the summertime he would put that essence in the water of the cooler. So when the
Ah,
cooler would go on, the whole house would smell of rose on one
right.
day, and it would smell of papaya on another day, or it would smell of something
Right.
random called Rambo or Dream Girl. But I think, this, and the way my mom explained, like, it wasn't like she was telling me a big memory of hers. She was just saying it with such childlike innocence and naivety, and felt like the tenderness of that experience, an entire family embraced by a single smell, an entire family surrounded by
Mm-hmm.
the beauty of perfume, like living in this enchanted garden almost, right? And
Right.
that little soul memory became the anchor upon which the character of Vivek started to grow in my mind. But again, like
Right.
when I started to write, I didn't really understand how perfumery works, or how, like you said, primal our sense of smell truly is, because we smell, everyone can smell, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think if we stopped smelling, a lot of joy would
Mm-hmm.
disappear from our world. So, for instance, during COVID, a lot
Yes.
of people couldn't smell, and I think they really doubted maybe whether food was good, or what something tasted like, or whether they could taste anything at all, because it's all, sight is associated to smell, taste is associated to smell. A lot of the things that give us joy and happiness are derived
Mm-hmm.
from the fact that we can smell. But to smell is commonplace, we it is our
Right.
least understood organ, our least understood
Right.
sense, and we don't really give it
Absolutely.
the importance that it deserves.
Right. Like, I mean, and when you were just talking about it, I think like the only thing I could keep thinking of was how taken for granted we take the sense of smell, to the extent that let's take food, like when you mentioned that people couldn't taste food. I mean, one of the most common experiences in life is like smelling like freshly cooked food, and like something that you really like, and like the emotions it inspires in you, and this ability to kind of like non-verbally convey or ignite emotions in you is just fantastic. I mean, the other thing, like the thing you described, like beyond it being primal, I think very subconsciously human beings use smell to identify each other. Like when I was reading your book, I
Yeah,
could like just think about how every individual around me, like include my family members, my girlfriend, my friends, you could just there is a distinct scent each one of them carries. And I don't know if I can describe it in any way whatsoever how my father smells,
yeah,
but
no, I agree.
he has that unique scent which I know. I mean, I can recognize it in a huge room as well. Like this is oh, my father just entered the room because this is how he is. I mean, yeah, it's very fascinating that this was I'm really struggling to describe in words how I was feeling while reading
The thing is
this book.
that smell, we
Right.
do not have a vocabulary to capture it, right? I mean, on one hand, it is such an
Exactly.
esoteric, almost imaginative realm. On the other hand,
Right.
perfumery as a
Mhm.
science, as a chemistry, has such a
Right.
particular vocabulary. And I think the reason why smell is so abstract is why
Mhm.
we need to have the particularities of vocabulary when speaking about perfume. Like, what is
Right.
a soft smell? What is a hard smell? What rose
Mhm.
smells powdery? What kind of jasmine
Right.
smells sweet? What is a green smell? What is a floral smell? So I think all of these things, because smell is undescribable in a way. We can't describe how we feel towards it.
Right.
It is important to associate really concrete, definitive characteristics to perfume.
Right. Right. And something as basic as notes, right? Like, I mean, of the fact that a scent can have various notes. I mean, we live in a very odd world, right? We lived in a world of deodorants and perfumes. That's the. I mean, as much as I know of ethers, I have seen my family hails from North India. I have seen in my childhood people use ethers, but not as
Hmm.
much anymore, right? And that actually brings me to the other bit, right, which played a role as much, if not as much as scent, is calligraphy, or I can't even pronounce the actual Urdu word for it. But right. So, I mean, both of them. It's very interesting that you chose to weave these two elements into your story because, I mean, generally I do talk to authors about what the kind of research that goes into their book. But I mean, it's I think at the point of time pointless to talk to you about what research went into your about partition, because clearly you are kind of, your work has become like the go-to place a lot of people start their research off from. But these two things I'm actually quite curious about it. uh I mean, you did mention how your grandfather, who was a chemist in Kabul, kind of inspired Vivek's character. But what about the other end? Why was Firdaus associated with calligraphy? Was there a memory associated there? And again, how did you trace the journey of these two art forms for your book?
Well, I think calligraphy came into the manuscript because I come from a printing background. Right, for those of you who don't know, I'm trained
Right,
as a
right.
metal engraver and lithographer. I spent nearly a decade making paper, sewing books, setting type, like
Mm-hmm,
working with my hands on something that would eventually physically become a book. And I think part of the reason was honestly to return to that landscape through a very
mm-hmm,
visceral means. But the other part
mm-hmm,
was to shine light on this art form that played such a major role in something like knowledge and literacy, and has been, kind of in a way losing its resonance because of automation and modernization. So I wanted to bring in this character who again was fostered in a very traditional art. So Firdaus is a calligrapher, but more than a calligrapher, she's actually the illuminator,
mm-hmm,
someone who works on the illuminated borders of manuscripts with dyes that are made from semi-precious stones, someone who is making dyes very much like making perfumes, or someone who is working on very minute, intricate, detailed work, someone who's making paper. And those were things that I did all through my bachelor's master's degree. I remember crushing stones and making dyes. I remember using ink and paint and squirrel head brushes. So it was really to return to that landscape of visual art, to bring some of that into literally into the writing, and I think to feel closer to a medium that I hadn't been in for a long time. There is also a sense of these two arts dominating the landscape of Lahore in the book. So Lahore is
mm-hmm,
portrayed, at least in the first half, the book portrayed as a center of where traditional arts thrive, where it was very
mm-hmm.
much like that. And I think the two main characters, Samir and Firdaus, in their artistry, bring a sense of importance and urgency to the caring of these
Right,
crafts.
right, right. Yeah, I mean, it actually something that I was thinking when I was reading about this was that, I mean, it's a beautiful story to read for fiction, right? But in that sense, as like someone who's born and raised in Mumbai, and a lot of people who grow up in Bombay, Delhi, or like metropolitan cities, or for that matter, non-metropolitan cities as well, right? I think it's a rather sad realization when you engage with such books that unfortunately you might not be able to, I don't know, thrive with this kind of culture again. Like, I mean, we do not, despite being former centers for arts, not Mumbai as much, but Delhi, right? Uh, I'm pretty sure it's not as prevalent as it was at
Yeah, of
years
course.
ago,
I mean,
right?
to find a calligrapher that still worked in the same kind of medium as I wanted Firdaus to work to work with the same bamboo reeds to make their own ink, to talk about the spiritual relevance of the art of calligraphy. I had to search, and I had to return to that person again and again. And for me, I think I would say I am a method writer. If I'm writing about something, I want to know how to do it. I want to know how to hold the pen. I want to know how to dip the ink. I want to know how to write the letters. So to learn all that and then to be able to render that kind of doing into the book was very important to me. But it's not easy to find people that are willing to share these dying remnants of these incredible arts, even perfumery for that matter, to understand how something is made from a flower into a bottle of perfume. I don't think enough of us take that into consideration when we purchase bottles of perfume, the hours or the kind of incredible talent that goes into it, right? So it was certainly to highlight something in the process of these arts as well. And yeah, you're right. It's an antiquated world that we can't return to, right?
And the weird bit is, like, I don't think anyone would disagree when you say that there is a certain craving each one of us has to enjoy that world. But somehow, despite having a consensus on that, we can't seem to return to that, or at least somewhat be able to engage to that extent.
See, I mean, I think in this way, books are perhaps one of the most seamless vehicles, because
Right.
one of the things that we are prone to do is to delve into nostalgia of time past. But I think, as I've learned writing on Partition for so long, is that nostalgia also needs to be taken with a pinch of salt and be reasoned with, right? There is beauty and this kind of magical aura in the arts of perfumery and calligraphy, but it's not without its own problems, right? So, also to bring in the realities of that craft, to bring in to see how politics enters the beauty of art. I think that was also very important for me, and to portray the time, right?
Right. Okay, Achal, I'm going to take a step back from the content of the book to actually kind of the process of coming about with the book, right? Because, and you're a fantastic person to talk to about this, because now you've engaged with both realms, non-fiction and fiction. So did you notice like a change in the way you were writing, or like the writing process that you went about? Because I know your non-fiction writing was very methodical, and you did mention that you want to get into with very methodic writer and kind of examining from the research perspective. But in terms of penning down your thoughts, was it a more I know, because fiction is that medium, right? Like fiction is one medium where you can actually just let your thoughts pour and not really care about, I mean, editing comes secondary, right? Like, I mean, fact checks and everything, as opposed to writing a non-fiction. When you're writing, say, the kind of work that you've written in the past, when you're going ahead with a narrative, you can't really, your writing can't describe something that hasn't been said by the person who's narrating the story, right? As flowery as you can get with the language. But fiction affords you like a freedom that no other one does. So was there, I don't know, a noticeable change in the way you were approaching things?
I think the change was not so much in the way I was writing or the methodology of the writing. The change was in knowing what to do with the freedom that fiction gives you, because it's boundless, right? You feel liberated, but you feel
Right.
really consumed by how you're going to go about using that freedom. I think I said earlier I couldn't have written this book without writing the nonfiction that I had written, because as a professional historian, it gives you that kind of craving for authenticity and nuance. You become a great researcher, right? So in that sense, every newspaper opened in this book, every radio broadcast in this book, every fire, every train, every ship is real, every journey is real, every political riot is real, because I knew that I was not interested in creating a whole new world. I was interested in seeing the how elastic the world already is, and how
Right.
seamlessly I can insert fictional characters into that world and for them to be believable, right? But I
Right.
think there is a real daunting. The task is very daunting, because I am not prepared to have so much freedom. I am not prepared to imagine Well, I think particularly because of the kind of nonfiction that I have written, which is based on what you see and based on what is given to you by an interviewer, I was not prepared for the smallest, like the stupidest things. And it's really quite funny. I mean, even when I say it out loud, it'll sound really.
Like, for example,
For example, what's the color of the wall of this room? What accent is the person speaking in? Is their voice low or is it high? What are they wearing? If they live in this area, what religion are they? You know, when they say this, how will they say this? It is very important to know
right,
everything about your character. You're creating, you know, you may interact with the character, even if it's a secondary one,
right,
a couple of pages, but you need to know the backstory of every character to be able to give the most authentic part of themselves in those few pages that they'll be in the book. And so it was a lot of
right.
basing characters on real people as well. But I think this kind of boundlessness
Mhm,
that freedom provides you, it really got in my
mhm.
way as well. Right? On one hand,
I,
I mean, on one hand, you can imbue the narrative with such
yeah,
nuance, detail, and on the other hand, you can just be overrun by the details because how much is too much, right? Historical
that
fiction
is
is an incredible way to teach people about historical events. And I think in this case, Partition, of course, but the Indian soldiers in the First World War, I feel like I really wanted to do justice to their experiences. But
yeah,
it was hard balancing fact and fiction, balancing the manner of writing and storytelling with the history happening at the time. You know,
mhm,
it was
yeah.
very challenging.
No,
I think
and I
in terms of that, the writing fiction is far more challenging, in my opinion.
that's very interesting because I think that's a curse, like I think knowing a writer carries, like that you might just find yourself reflected in one of the characters in a book, because as much as a author tries, I think you just end up taking, and I mean nothing wrong, absolutely, that's how the world will be, like that's where you'd find inspiration for your art. But it's uh it's a very interesting idea that I don't remember who had mentioned this to me, but you mentioned that maybe even while you're engaging with secondary characters who might appear for a couple of pages, but the work involved in creating that character is actually not something that anyone can see, right? Because you might have to imagine like his or her entire personality, background, if they're living in a certain area, how what their accent would be, just for that one or two lines that they might mention in that page, right? So like the reader would be like, huh, okay, let's just read
Well,
this
I'll,
line as
I'll give you
characters.
an example. I'll give you a really direct example from the book of something that was supposed to
Right.
happen and how it eventually did happen. So, one of the characters, Samir, in fact, Samir, who is the one of the main
Mhm.
protagonists, finds his way to France on a ship. And when he is on that ship, he
Mhm.
meets a character called Sayyid Ali. And now, in the earlier drafts, and Sayyid Ali is portrayed as this really savvy sort of businessman who's been all over the world. He knows everything. He's the kind of guy. He's the kind of guy who can get things right. Now, he's very polite, very gentlemanly, very
Right.
suave. And in the earlier editions of the book, he was actually a character working on the ship. And at some point in this edition, he says, I have done the work you can't imagine. I started working from a very young age. So in the earlier editions, he was someone working on the ship. And then through the course of our edits, he became this very affluent character actually on the ship. But the memory of him having worked on a ship before and how it feeds into the wisdom that he gives Samir, that Samir later carries. Samir starts to think of him as a real fatherly figure, but it comes from a very sort of
Mhm.
shared experience of having lost somebody or having to work at a very young age. And and now I feel very confident to speak about Sayyid Ali's character as it is in his present iteration because I know of what his past has been like. And I think that kind of there is just something so unexpected in creating fictional characters that you are solely responsible for the
Right.
creation of someone's life and the manner in which they go
Right.
about that life that I don't think I ever experienced writing nonfiction, even though they were very much real people with real
Yeah.
stories.
No, of course, creationism in itself is like a very powerful appealing, I suppose. And on, I don't know, I would like to believe that there is this I don't know, some glee in the fact that there is this. I mean, let's take Sayyid Ali, for example, right? I mean, this entire history of him that exists in your head, which probably no one else knows, but I mean, that line means so much more to you when you say reread your work or you read it out loud. But and that's the beauty of your work, that it's your role to kind of accumulate all of his history into those few lines to kind of convey all of it to the reader. So it's absolutely fantastic how you managed to do that. Uh, Aanchal, so tell me this. I mean, I know you. Uh, I mean, you've spent a lot of time talking to people and families who've been affected by the partition. Uh, but my question is largely not related to this, but I just wanted to run this by, right? That who was the first person or the first few people who you read who went over your drafts of your fiction book? Was
Mm.
it someone from your family, a close friend, or did you like turn to a outsider? And what was their reaction when they kind of read
Um,
your work?
well, uh, I wrote a proposal, a long proposal. I think it was like 18 to 20
Okay.
pages of the full story.
Okay.
And
Okay.
my mother is the first person who reads everything, actually, because she's
Hmm.
very unabashedly honest. Like, if it's bad, she'll tell me it's bad. If it's she has no qualms about giving me absolute details about how terrible something reads, or how dry or unfinished, or oh, it reads very well, oh, that's so interesting. And in this case, I think the feedback that I got
Right.
from her was that she just kept asking, like, where did this story come from? Why? How is this? How have you put this together? And then that was in 2016. And then slowly, after it really came together in its final iteration and she read it, she was again the first person. And I think my agent. Yeah.
Right. So wait, 2016. So
Hmm.
like this has been like in the works for like 8, 9
No,
years now.
even before Remnants came out, it was December, I think I started putting the story down.
Wait, so you had the proposal in place before you put remnants in place. Wow, that's so. Oh wow.
I think
Okay, so
I had submitted the manuscript of Remnants in March 2017, and I went for my
mm,
first proper holiday to Paris. And of course, it was never going to be a holiday;
mm,
it was always going to be like a working trip because I started writing the book there.
mhm,
And I was
right.
walking
Wow.
and taking in the sites that were eventually going to find their way into the book.
Right. No, and it's quite fascinating because okay, so I mean I presumed, and I'm pretty sure a lot of your readers would have presumed that uh it's the other way around. Like your work on remnants and the other book kind of drove a
It,
lot of this book, but
yeah,
like
it did.
but yeah, but of course I'm sure it did, but like like
It did.
the very fact that it germinated before those two books is a very interesting thought.
But like I was submitting the manuscript for Remnants, right? Which meant I was working on it for many years, and the research
Mhm.
for in the language was also going on at the same time. I didn't know that in the language
Right.
it would become a book because I was just collecting interviews as side
Mhm.
research. But I think it was because I was
Right.
doing so many interviews for Remnants that I began thinking of this. It would never have come, or maybe it
Right.
would have come. I don't know. I can't say. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So, Achal, a very, very cliched question, but it's just been on my mind for a real ever since I read the book. Which was the first character you thought of? Like, where did the story begin from in your head? Like, what was the first thought that you just convinced you this character has come into existence and now it cannot die? Like, this has to be put down on paper.
It came from Vivek. It came from
Hmm.
Vivek. I know that the story is spun around Sameer and Firdaus, but for me, actually, the two main protagonists are Vivek and Sameer. They are the anchors to the story.
Right.
Without Vivek, Sameer cannot exist. Without Vivek's desperation
Right.
to understand perfume, without his need to sort of imbue himself in a kind of visceral beauty that perfumery brings, Sameer and his nose would never have been born. So for me, it's the beginning is Vivek. His commitment to smell,
Right.
his tragedy that leads him there, the sadness that surrounds his life, the courage that is required to go on with life despite the sadness. It's Vivek, yeah.
Okay. That's okay. And so it's been a while, I think, since about a month and a half, 2 months since the book has come out, and I'm sure you've been hearing all the rave reviews and praise from people. But has there been any particular, let's say, remark, if not feedback, or I don't know, someone's memory of the book that stood out for you? I mean, you met a bunch of people, I'm sure, at like festivals or bookstores or wherever. Has something that's really stood out for you, which kind of made you go like, huh, okay, now I feel like this book was worth the entire effort that went into it because of this one reaction that it could inspire in someone?
I think that's putting too much weight on singular reactions. You know,
No, of course, I'm sure, like, it's, I mean, I'm not saying that you did it for that particular thing, but I just wanted to gauge because uh people have their usual reactions to things, right? So I mean, I'll tell you why I asked you the question
Mhm.
also. So a couple of days back I was watching this documentary on Netflix called The Romantics. It's about Yash Raj films, okay? And it's goes back to a time when Shah Rukh was not keen on doing DDLJ,
Hmm.
and Adi Chopra was kind of trying to woo him. And there was this one scene, memory he talks about where there's this old woman who is comes to Shah Rukh and he's signing autographs, and she goes that, I really like you and तुम बहुत अच्छे लगते हो बेटा, but तुम हर पिक्चर में बहुत मार खाते हो कि तुम मैं मरने के लिए एक बार एक ऐसी पिक्चर देखना चाहती हूँ जिसमें तुम मार नहीं खा रहे हो. And that's kind of was the not the clicking point, but Adi Chopra remembers that after 4 or 5 meetings, this was the only time when Shah Rukh actually just said, okay, yeah, let's go ahead and do it. And this was like 5 minutes after that conversation. So it's the idea being that there are these random remarks or like random things that kind of people have different reactions to what you're doing, which leave a lingering this thing. It's okay if you don't have one. I just was curious if you anything of that sort had popped up.
Well, nothing that poignant, of course. But someone
Yeah.
told me recently that they had a crush on one of my characters, a crush on a fictional character, and I couldn't believe that I had conceived of a character that was crushable. Like, I don't know if that's
Yeah.
the word,
Yeah.
but it's nowhere
Yeah. I mean,
as Shah Rukh Khan's thing.
no, I would disagree. I mean, I think so. Okay, as a bibliophile, I think all bibliophiles agree with the fact that they have at some point in life had a crush on a fictional character. But I think that goes to speak volumes about the kind of work that you've come up with, right? Like the ability to convince human beings who inherently know that they're diving into a world which is non-existent and still to that extent develop affection for a character is remarkable. I would be very
For
proud.
me, I mean, for me also, I'm trying to wrap my head around that because it's the first time, right? It's the first time. I don't know if
Yeah.
I'll ever be able to do it again. Yeah, I thought that that was a really moving comment, and it made me smile.
So yeah, Achal, so something that we spoke about last time around as well, but this is going to have a very different twist to it because this time we speak to you in your capacity as an author of fictitious work. Uh, I find always that authors are really driven by you know works that they've read earlier, right? I mean, it's the fodder that kind of drives their art. So in that sense, has there been a particular piece of fiction that's stood out for you, or something, both in terms of whether how it defined you as a person, or kind of defined your aspirational goals as a writer? Like this is the kind of work that I want to create.
You know, when I had the idea to, I mean, I'll answer that question as well. Such a great question, difficult question. But when I had the idea to write about something that was led by smell, led by the senses, there is one book that looms so heavy, which is Patrick Susskind's Parfum. And I think ever since I began writing, I haven't touched that book. I haven't returned to it. In it because I think even subliminally you may absorb a definition of something here, or like a way of smelling something there, or a meaning, a sentence, the way a flower curls, I didn't want to take
Right.
anything from him at all. So I love, adore that book. I adore what a feast it is for the senses. I love that I can taste things and smell things and feel, the cloth. And I just, that was one of the books that really drew me in terms of visceral writing. But I stayed away from it, and I think some point I'll read it again. Um, there are novels that I read again from time to time. Jonathan Safran Foer's Everything is Illuminated, which is about a young American man traveling back to Ukraine to find the woman who saved his grandfather during World War II. But he's a collector. He collects objects, and he doesn't just collect objects, but it is like this fantastical history of the objects that he has, and the history of the family that he's going to see, that is so vividly described in the book. But I don't think that I aspire to write like that, because it's a very unique sort of. I think everyone should read that book, and if not read, then watch the film, because it's equally as good.
Okay.
Um,
Okay. That's a rare description
it
for a
really
movie.
is. It really is. I mean, there's more
Yeah.
in the book, obviously. Like, you understand more of the, social and mythological history of the place in the book, but the
Right.
film is excellent. And
Right.
funny, and really funny. The other book I think played a huge role while I was writing was Anthony Doerr's All the Light We Cannot See, which
Right.
again is a World War II book, and again about people that do really meticulous, methodical things like reading
Right.
braille and fixing radios,
Right.
and this very unprecedented friendship or companionship that emerges in the book. The other writer that I think has always influenced my work is Anuradha Roy.
Mhm.
And of course, her novels, I think it comes from she's a potter, and
Yeah.
she's a ceramicist. And I
Yeah.
think for me, it is people that stagger multiple worlds, that allow the
Right.
tactility of one world to bleed into another and to present it
Right.
on the page. So similarly, someone like Edmund Dewall, who
Mm.
does the same thing in his nonfiction. So
Mhm.
yeah, these are, I think, the people that I know I will return to, and I always return to from time to time.
Yeah, I mean, I'm so glad you mentioned Anuradha Roy because she's one of my favorite authors as well. And uh, her work on ceramics. She's actually come out with this book, the latest one, The Earth Spinner. I'm not sure if you've read it or not.
Already, yeah,
It's yeah, it's so bloody good. And I mean, I had her on my podcast and to talk about it, and it's so like, I mean, I get exactly what you're saying, right? Like this idea of
exactly.
handling this
Yes.
multifaceted world, which kind of, and it's just beautiful. Like these authors like this are rare to
What
come
it
by.
was for me also, like, as a printer, I know what it's like to touch a
Mhm.
piece of fine Japanese
Right.
paper, Kashmiri paper. I know what perfume paper smells like. So
Right.
to write about it was to be able to relive it in a way.
Yeah.
It brings that kind of real, like, nuance that maybe someone just reading about it will not have, right?
Right.
And I think that it made me feel so close to the medium that I come from, and it was a real joy to write about that. Similarly, I think at one point in my nonfiction, I wrote about Zarina Hashmi's woodcuts.
Mhm.
And I know what it feels like to cut through wood. I know exactly how she did it. I know what it feels like to lay down a form on a piece of birch wood and carve through it. So to write from experience, lived experience, is about an art form, is really
Right.
so special.
Right. Okay. Achal, unfortunately, we're at the end of the podcast, so I just have one final question for you before I let you go. So, what's next on the horizon? Are we going to see another?
Dreaded
Nothing.
question. Um,
Yeah.
you know, uh,
Actually, I would be very glad to hear if you're not doing anything.
yeah,
Like that would be
that is it.
that, right? That's a great place to be at. I really want to hear more people say that in life.
I don't, to be very honest, I don't have anything. And it's because I've
Mm,
actually just been writing nonstop, nonfiction and
right,
fiction for the past 5 years. My brain is very tired. And I want to
right,
be able to read for the pleasure of reading. And, and I think now that I have a bit of confidence in the fact that I can write fiction, I am at a very privileged position to
mm,
know to like is my next project going to be fiction or non-fiction? I don't know, but I
right,
think that will be determined by the idea.
right,
So,
right.
I'm going to agree with you
No,
and say, as of now, there's nothing.
no, that's fantastic because the bit that you just said that you want to be, your brain's tired, you want to read for the sake of reading. I experienced that with the podcast, right? Like, I mean, I've been doing this for about 2.5, 3 years, and like sometime last year, I just reached a stage where I was reading for the sake of like posting the interview rather than like experiencing and enjoying the work, and I really did not like that. I absolutely, like, there was this huge period of introspection I had to go through, that okay, I need to kind of
Yeah.
take a step back and not do this as much, because it can't be, it's my love for reading that drives the podcast, not the other way around, right? And it can, like, the moment you see that turning is when you kind of have to take a step back.
I think the last time I did that was when I was in grad school and I took a sabbatical and I came to India when I had no ideas, and the
Mm,
Remnants idea came to me.
okay, and here's hoping my secret dreams to be an author comes out of this.
I hope so as
But
well. I hope so as
right,
well. But you're right. You do need a bit of pause. You need to reflect on the things that have
mm,
happened to you, the feedback of the readers. But I think also just to let I'm really inspired when I read other people. That is my one way of getting over, writing blocks, I guess, by
right.
reading other people and the things that they have gone through and the sentences that they create. I love reading people's on a language level, so
You know,
Hmm.
if you like that, you should really check out this book called In Other Words by Jhumpa Lahiri.
Oh
It
yeah, of
is
course. But also like there's so much going on in that book, the conception of that
yes,
book, the
yeah, like
process of
it's
that book, the immersion of that book. And I think for me, like that has even more
absolutely
relevance. I'm learning French at the moment, so it we are so conscious of our language as writers, and there
right.
I just find there's such an inhibition for me to be able to speak in a tongue that's foreign, to listen to myself saying words that sound and are formed unnaturally in the mouth for me at the moment.
Right.
So I love that book. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I hope there is some more, like, something along those lines that comes from you in the future when you're done with your cake and there are ideas that pop up. But yeah. Thank you so much for doing this, Aanchal. This was absolutely lovely, and your book is fantastic. I absolutely loved reading it, and I can't stop recommending it to people.
Oh,
The links to the book
thank
are down there. The link here for the podcast. I really urge everyone to check it out and check out all of Aanchal's previous work as well. Thank you so much.
thank you for having me.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please check us out on all our social media platforms. We're available across all podcasting platforms on YouTube, on Instagram. You can find us at the rate Kitabi Karwan on Instagram, or just search Kitabi Karwan on Google or a platform of your choice and you'll find us. We carry out Instagram lives, giveaways, we talk about books, we talk to bibliophiles, talk to authors, and basically try and create a reader's world through all of our platforms. Do check us out and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Thank you.